Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. It's an incredible privilege to be here and to open the Congress. My name is Tammam Aloudat. I'm the CEO of the new Humanitarian. And we, along with MSF, MDM, Oxfam, and the German Red Cross, are sponsoring this. And there was a question whether, how long has this been going? At least as far as I know, or have been here. I think the first time I came to the Congress was 2013, but it has been there for a while before. And I think it is particularly important as we talk today about humanitarianisms, and I will come to that in a second, that we realize that this is part of a long tradition of having a discussion and a debate about our milieu, about our work. But it also comes in a time that is quite exceptional. I know there's a habit of saying it is always different. We are in different times. But we might actually be in different times. And this is for several reasons. One of them is what is happening now. I was telling a colleague, again, at the risk of revealing my age, that I've actually, as we were navigating here on 3 phones and 3 versions of Google Maps, that I've learned how to navigate on a paper map and a compass. And it is different because we live in a different world. It is different also because we are acting towards this world very differently. We have conflicts that are raging, and you could argue that there has always been conflict. But we are living in a time where 2 of those have been strongly mentioned as a genocide, both in Gaza and in Sudan. We are in a time where Lebanon is being bombed inside the ceasefire. Iran has had civilians killed. The Iranian Red Crescent has had more than 20 centers bombed. We are also in a time where the neglect of places like Somalia or DRC or Myanmar, or places that live under different kinds of violence, whether authoritarian violence or communal violence, continue to be absent from our news feeds. We're at a time where politics are played on Twitter rather than in speeches. We're at a time where threats of eliminating civilization are not even surprising anymore. And taking that into account, I want to stand for a second and mention it is also a different time because over the past 3 years, more than 1,000 humanitarians have been killed, a number that is unprecedented in its time. Journalists have been killed systematically. As we speak, we are seeing things that go from triple taps on places where humanitarians are working, where the same place gets bombed multiple times, so to inflict the most damage possible. We have journalists like Ahmed Shahabuddin, has been for 7 weeks in prison in Kuwait because he shared a publicly available CNN footage of a Kuwaiti airplane shooting down, or Kuwaiti air defenses shooting down an American plane. Just pointing out what is happening is not enough. We need to think about why is it happening. And I think it is important to not fall into the first-degree causality. Trump is not a cause, Trump is a symptom. The politics of our time are not the cause of, and I think that is important because many of us have the wishful thinking of, we will just ride this out. It's only 3 years more, and then we're back to normal. I want to point that normal wasn't good, and that there isn't going back to normal anymore. We are in a time where the failure of politics is not an accident. We're in a time where a company like Palantir, a murderous company that produces surveillance systems, puts out political manifestos where they're talking about democracy can't survive without hard power, so they can justify selling more weaponized systems. While the humanitarian world still recycles conversations about reform, those of you who are as old as I am will remember are identical to the ones that were talked in 2014 before the grand bargain. It is not an accident because underlying what is happening is a massive inheritance and unhinging of structural violence. It's schizophrenic. We talk about equity and act differently. And it's different because as bad as politics have been, and I want to paraphrase, probably poorly, Hannah Arendt, who said that no one is surprised that politics and truth don't do well with each other. But at least now, the masks have slipped. Politics is not bothering anymore to pretend to be benevolent. We see that every day. Aid cuts are prominent. We talk about the US aid cuts as a catastrophic symptom. They've paid in aid totally about 60-something billion a year. And just this year, the military expenditure of the US proposed for next year is $1.5 trillion. Just to put it in context, all the aid that we've lost is a drop in the bucket. The war in Iran costs $2 billion a day. A war with no purpose, a war of aggression that kills civilians, costs more than, around every day, the annual budget of MSF that works in 70 countries sees in excess of 15 million patients a year, the annual budget. It costs every day about the budget of the new Humanitarian, which is the single newsroom that covers humanitarianism, for about 600 years. And this is not accident because the dissolution of norms that used to scaffold our ability to work, the humanitarian compromise whereby you do your politics, we pretend to be apolitical and get resources and space, has disappeared. It doesn't exist anymore as much as we pretend it does. Where we find ourselves is having slid from having been or thought of ourselves as rebels doing humanitarian work into being policy wonks, into sitting in rooms with people in suits and talk about policies that probably will never be realized. And I want to talk about this because one of the best things I've read is in a text by David Graeber, who was an anthropologist in LSE, and famously coined, "We are the 99% in the Occupy Wall Street." And he says, the notion of policy presumes a state of governing apparatus which imposes its will on others. Policy is the negation of politics. Policy is by definition something concocted by some form of elites which presume it knows better than others how their affairs are to be conducted. I don't think we can do that anymore. We cannot pretend anymore that we know better than others how their affairs are to be conducted. And this is the conversation, because the next question is, where do we go from here? And this is hopefully what we were going to discuss today. We are going to talk about how humanitarianisms are in transition. And for those of you who find it confusing that we have the S in brackets after humanitarianism, it is intentional. Because while we have to acknowledge that we are still sitting and having this conversation today in a capital in the global north, in one of the donor countries, and where it is nearly impossible to get a visa for most of the people who are concerned with this conversation, we have to acknowledge as well that we cannot go on pretending that there is one form of legitimate humanitarianism, that we know how it's done, or that we can impose that on others. And the first step is to acknowledge that this is one of many, and might not even be the best one, and that there are many things to learn, starting by not pretending to tell people how to run their affairs. It is a big transition, I acknowledge. It's not easy, but it is important. It is important for the people we serve. It's also important for the survival of the notion of humanitarianism itself. We have to acknowledge the privilege of geography, the privilege of history, that most of us have inherited our Western notion of humanitarianism from times of colonial domination, and that this needs to change. We have written stories in the New Humanitarian about most of this. We have tried to center the voices of people who are affected. And I acknowledge that even with that, even with the best intention, we still are gatekeepers. We still accept or deny people their voice and space on our pages. And that also has to change. I think we have an incredible day ahead of us today, and then more tomorrow. And I will not take too much of your time, but I want you to think about one simple thing. If humanitarianism didn't exist, if it was a novel prospect, no one ever thought about it before. Henri Dunant didn't go to Solferino to resolve his commercial issues 170 years ago almost. And we thought, let's do something. We had a blank page. And we sat and thought about it and did the best we can. Would it look like what we have today? My assertion is it wouldn't. It would look far away from it. And maybe one of the ideas that we can haggle with is, how about not spending all our time tinkering with the nuts and bolts, but actually think about how the whole could look, and how do we go towards that? It is exciting to be here, and I thank you very much, both you who are on the floor and those who are online. Many people are giving us their time, and this is a huge privilege. I will give you a very quick run of also some of the housekeeping things. Accessibility notice. The live English captions will be displayed on the screen at the front of the stage. Make sure there's always good visibility and don't cover them. If you have any help needed, approach any of the volunteers. You can recognize them by their colored, whatever this thing is called, hanging thingy. There's an awareness team that look for them. They are in red vests. If you need space available or throughout the Congress. The catering is available in 2 locations, here in Beton Halle and in Mars Restaurant next to the second session room. The Humanitarian Forum at the entrance of this room. You will find booths from various organizations, and in the evening we will have a wrap-up after the last parallel interactive sessions around 6 p.m. And join us for a getting together afterwards, those of you who are here in person. I will go swiftly now to our first keynote discussion, and I will introduce you to Krizna Gomez, who is facilitating the session. Krizna is a human rights lawyer turned futurist, and she's a co-founder of Rogue Nation. She's originally from the Philippines. She's worked with many NGOs who have, especially in situations of volatility, to an innovation strategy and foresight. She's going to introduce the speakers, and I invite her to be here on the stage. Thank you, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Tammam. It's actually Rogue Union. Rogue Nation is a Tom Cruise movie. But sometimes I'm tempted to change the name. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kriz. It's Krizna, but everyone calls me Kriz, like I say, except my mother when she's upset with me, so please call me Kriz. And so I have the privilege of going all Oprah on our 2 keynote speakers. But before I do that, I want to get a sense of the room. We always wonder, I ask the organizers, how many in the room are this, how many are these, so why not find out, yeah? So if I call on you and you think the description applies to you, please stand up. You know sitting is the new smoking? I'm gonna get you to stand up, yeah? If you are still studying and looking to afterwards spend your career in humanitarianisms or adjacent work, please stand up. Awesome. The future looks bright. It'll be complex. Salaries will be an issue. But the future looks bright. Thank you. Those of you who have been working in this field for up to 5 years, please stand up. Yay. Wonderful. Look around, huh? Yeah? These are your peers, your tribe. Thank you. Please sit down. If you have been working in this field for more than 5 years, but up to 10 years, please stand up. Wow. Thank you. If you have been in this work for more than 10 years, up to 20 years, please stand up. Oh, you're still here? Okay, thank you very much. If you have been working in this field for more than 20 years, up to 30 years, please stand up. Wow. Wow. Now, this is a gamble. Anyone here who's been working in this field for more than 30 years, please stand up. Amazing. We all owe them a beer or a cup of tea later. Thank you for all your work. I have the privilege of calling on the stage Nadine Saba, who just flew in from Beirut. She lives actually in the north of Lebanon in a place called Akkar. And we know the situation in Beirut today. Nadine, can you please take your seat? Please give her a round of applause. And then we have, straight from the airport, but also on the ground in Gaza, as recent as 6 weeks ago, Hansjoerg. Please come up. I don't think they're ready for what's about to happen, but we will do this anyway. So, we're going to talk about change, reform, transform, throw out things in the window. But I want to do a little bit of an exercise. So as you may have heard from Tammam, I'm a futurist, which means I help organizations and leaders across the social impact sector, meaning humanitarian, human rights, climate, all the different silos that we have, think about multiple futures and then work backwards from those futures to make decisions today. So changes today that are not based on what we think today, only what has happened in the past, but inspired by the visions of futures we want or we're trying to prevent, or maybe we're not even aware of. But for that, we have to believe in the possibility of change. Nadine, can you please describe to me your day? So April 20th, 20 years ago. Where were you? Who were you waking up to? What were your biggest concerns? What were you doing? How old were you? If you would like to divulge that, otherwise you have the human right to divulge your biological maturity. But describe to us how your life was on April 20th, 2006.
Actually, in 2006, I was coming back from a fellowship in the US. So I had 3 months of training at a US law firm. I came back to Lebanon, and I was trying to get back into a law firm, and I had an offer from a law firm in Beirut and an offer from a law firm in Abu Dhabi. And I was in between, these two. At one moment, I didn't want to leave Lebanon. And then I had a friend who, at that moment, Lebanon was going through a lot of political changes. And there was a commission to review the electoral law. And I had a friend who worked at an international organization who said, we are having different experts who are coming to Lebanon to look and support the government over this, and they would need somebody to help them in terms of, translation, in terms of legal understanding, in terms of the understanding in the country, and would you want to do this? And I said, well, for how long? She said, I think 3 months. I said, this is perfect. This would give me the time to see where I would go and how I would do things. And I applied. I didn't get the job because they did not open the position at the headquarters. But what happened is the country director of that organization passed my resume to another international organization who called me and said, come for an interview. And this is how I got technically within the whole work of international organizations. And at that moment, 2006, I'm like, me being a humanitarian was something that, what does that mean? Yeah. I'm just doing something in my country, something I like. So for me, April was that moment, because in May I got the job. In June, we had the 2006 war. In July, we had the 2006 war. So technically, I was almost like a month or so before the war came in.
So on this day 20 years ago, you weren't selected for a job, then you got picked for another job, and that started you off in this path.
More or less.
More or less. Thank you, Nadine. Hansjoerg, tell us about your day 20 years ago. What was your favorite color?
Favorite color has always been the same, blue. 20 years ago, 2006, I was in Lebanon, actually. I was the deputy of the Hariri Investigation Commission, investigating the killing of the former Lebanese prime minister by a car bomb in front of St. George Hospital by the regime that is now defunct in Syria. But we did interview them and investigate them, the president and the vice president. That's what I did 20 years ago.
You were investigating. Yes. Can you describe to us your day today? Well, not today. You came from the airport, you came from the hotel. But talk to us about your day-to-day now. Is it maybe slightly different from how it was 20 years ago? What do you do first thing you wake up in the morning? Like, walk me through your day. I'll start with you, Hansjoerg. You can skip the choosing the blue outfit part.
I'm not.
Yeah.
So when I'm in New York, I get up very early in the morning and I cycle. I mean, I just saw my friend Doug Mercado, who knows I'm an avid cyclist, and I go every morning, 5 o'clock, 5:30, winter, summer, I'm out there and do 30 kilometers. That's how I stay mentally sane and fit and keep my energy levels up. And it gives me time to think back to this journey. And I was just reminded of that. So when some of you got up and said, who wants to work in the humanitarian field, I don't think that at my time, when I was at the end of my studies, you would have seen that many people get up in the room, because there wasn't that much opportunity. I think despite the difficulties, we also have to recognize that in those intervening 30, 40 years, something enormous has happened. There is a much, much more sizable and also powerful, despite all the challenges, civil society around the world. And maybe it has evolved over the last 20, 30 years, or initially more in the West, but there is a revolution of civil society organizations, NGOs, and so on in the global South that demand their place and their space. So I do think that's a big difference. So for me, I got bored after I did my high school degree. And I got really bored, so I went straight into resistance, and I'm always happy to be back in Berlin, you know, because now I can stay in a hotel or do these things, but I was a squatter and spent basically every other day in court, and for illegal squatting of empty houses. That's what we would do in the early 80s or late 70s. And I thought it was getting kind of boring that I had to go to the court every 5 minutes. And so I want to do what they're doing, but just better. And so I studied law, and I became a judge, criminal law judge in Düsseldorf for 5 years, until I got bored by that. And then I dropped that and went to Bosnia for 3.5 years, 4 years during the war, or at the end of the war. And then the time after that until '98, and from there on it became a whole life basically. And I have to say, I went back. I'm sort of towards the end of my career, as you can tell from my 30 years of experience now. So I used to be Tom Fletcher's political advisor for a year, and before that, Martin Griffiths, and I've been doing this for a while. And I thought, I have about said and heard and turned around every single argument around the reset, around every single reform. I've seen all those reforms. It's always the same discussion around the same things. And I need to go back to the field. I need to go back to remember why I really joined this line of work and left comfortable job at the court. And I wanted to go back to Gaza, and that's what I do now. So when I wake up in the morning, I'm just pleased to be inspired every day by those wonderful, amazing people in Gaza for whom rebuilding and cleaning up and teaching their children is their way of resisting every single day.
Thank you, Hansjoerg. Nadine, tell us about your day today. Is it a bit different than 20 years ago?
I'm not as healthy as he is. So I don't go cycling. I used to go walking, not anymore. Sadly, I am guilty of checking first and foremost my phone. So for me, it's checking the notifications on my phone, specifically in this time, because you never know what happens in the night in Lebanon. I live up in Akkar in the north of the country, so I'm relatively safe from the bombing until now. from the bombing and everything that's been happening in the south, in Bekaa and in Beirut. So for me, first is checking the notifications, checking what happened, checking if, you know, there was something that's needed, new additional shelters were opened, because in the last months or so, we've had different schools that were converted into collective sites, into collective shelters. So sometimes if you have families that arrive in the night, new shelters open, and usually the team I work with is the team that responds first. So technically, you know, everything that we call RRM, all this jargon in giving...
RRM, can you please spell that out for us?
Yeah, it's the rapid response mechanism. So you have to provide first, you know, water, some hygiene kits, some dignity kits, certain things. So people, whenever they come in, they have, you know, the first main things that they need. So we are tasked of doing this, and at this moment you need to make sure that you get all the logistics, so, you know, having the trucks ready, having everybody ready. So usually this is the first thing I do. I check if I have this, and then we talk together and get things moving. Otherwise it's, you know, going to the office, checking your emails, sometimes going to the field if there are some activities. So it's just in regular, normal times, this is. And the times that we've been through is also getting calls from mayors, heads of municipalities, sometimes our focal point from the Ministry of Social Affairs, coordinating with the Disaster Risk Management Unit at the governorate to make sure that we're all on the same page, and then participating to all the cluster meetings that technically happen whenever you have such a crisis, and all the ad hoc meetings that also happen at that time. So this is kind of the day.
This is your day. Wasn't that much better than reading their titles on the board, or even their bios? I memorized their bios back and forth. I had no clue. I want to ask you to do the same exercise we just did. If you're fine with it, I'd like you to close your eyes. And imagine your day 20 years ago for a minute. When you're ready, I'd like you to open your eyes. Thankfully, I didn't hear any snoring.
That was a whole week.
That was a whole week. Now I'm going to ask you, how much change do you see from your life 20 years ago until today? If it's a lot of change, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand up high, all the way high. If some change, like this, you do this, and look around, huh? If you want to say nothing changed at all except your age, you go here. So, how much change, including the two of you, Nadine and Hansjoerg? How much change? I think for most of us, thank you very much, it's a huge change. And I do this exercise as a futurist because when I try to engage people in our sector who are swimming in despair and hopelessness and think that no change is possible, we go to the basic unit of our personal lives, and change is very possible. Of course, the humanitarian sector isn't just the individuals, it's a whole system, and architecture and culture, but at the end of the day, that system consists of us and people and stories. I want to transition us from the individual lives and a realization that change is possible to talking about the change. There is the humanitarian reset, the grand bargain, the nexus, the great aid recession. That's not change, but they all sound like titles of a movie or a Netflix TV series, right? I want to start tackling one of them. And by the way, if you came with a pocket full of acronyms and jargon, can you please empty your pockets? No? Yeah. Throw them out the window. Oh, except we don't have windows here. But I want you, Nadine, to tell us about this thing called the grand bargain. Treat me like someone who doesn't know anything about the humanitarian sector in 1 minute or under. What is this thing called the grand bargain? Why does it matter?
Before getting into the grand bargain, you're talking about change, but change is not necessarily towards better. So when you're talking...
We're going to get there. We're going to get there. Tell me about the grand bargain. They're both... In case you don't know, I have two radicals on stage. They're all itching to talk about all of these things, but I'm going to slow it down a bit. Tell me about the grand bargain.
I'm not itching to talk about the grand bargain or any of the things that you said.
Fine. That's why I asked Nadine. Go ahead, please. The grand bargain and how much you love or not love the grand bargain. Go ahead, please.
I didn't think we're talking about feelings here. Anyhow, so the grand bargain is this, as its name said, it's a bargain. It's a quid pro quo. It's an agreement that has been done by, major donors along with international organizations and intermediaries about, having more efficient, localized response, humanitarian response. So it's, whenever I'm asked about the grand bargain and about, what's happening, I always say that the grand bargain is as strong as its signatories want it to be strong, because it's a voluntary commitment. And when these commitments are not respected, there is no executive arm to say, no, you need to respect those commitments.
Nadine, can you tell us at least give it flesh and bones for me. What are some of these commitments? What, like moving money, more money or more means to local organizations? A
lot of the people think that, mainly the grand bargain is this 25% funding that is going as directly as possible to local organizations. But for me, when I talk about this and talk about the 25%, this is a manifestation, one. And second, it's because it's tangible. You can count money. But for me, when we talk about the grand bargain, it's much more than the money. It's much more than getting, this fund. Because, again, localization and how it goes has been marketed as being cheaper and has been implemented as changing the person who's delivering the service. So there's nothing about changing the way we're thinking about aid. There's nothing about how we're designing aid. Is it really responding to what's happening? Is it really fit for purpose in this moment, at this time, to this specific community and this specific context or not? So for me, when I talk about localization or when I talk about the commitments of the grand bargain, it goes beyond that. It goes to the essence and to the core of the system. Are we wanting to keep the system as it is, or are we really thinking of looking beyond? And when I say looking beyond, is acknowledging that there are also alternatives, that there are also other systems that have been going on. I mean, before the humanitarian system, people used to help each other. And people used to stand by each other. And there was social, community support from different communities. We did not invent something new. We just tried to put it into a certain framework that could be replicated from one place to another, and that doesn't work. So whenever we're talking about the grand bargain and localization, I believe it needs as well to enlarge our opinion to accept that there are other people, and this is where I shout out to Tammam, saying there are other things and other systems. And we have seen in Sudan the emergency response rooms. We have seen people supporting each other without thinking about international organizations, local organizations, whatever it is. Beirut port explosion. Before anybody was on the floor, people were helping each other, removing the rubbles, helping in everything. So grand bargain is, for me, is acknowledging that all these exist and see how we can use these tools. So very technical response, what the grand bargain is what I gave you in 2016, the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul, but for me, the essence of it goes beyond it.
Beautiful. I'm going to go back to you in a bit, and I'm going to go to Hansjoerg. What do you want to talk about? If we are to think differently about aid, in 2-3 points, like what are the provocations you want to give in this room to think differently about aid and really build on what Nadine talked about? Like, it's not one thing, it's not a technical thing, it's a whole system that has predated whatever system or field we have now.
So I want to pick up on the grand bargain, which, as you said, 10 years ago, not 20 years ago, 10 years ago.
So people in the live stream.
10 years ago, the World Humanitarian, the first and only so far World Humanitarian Summit took place in Istanbul. I was the main organizer of that event, and I've been through more grand bargain sessions that I wanted to, but the world 10 years ago was a different one. Our thinking was different. So the grand bargain was viewed as a great opportunity to bring actually the two main stakeholders at the time perceived, the donors and the humanitarian agencies, together at the table to resolve a number of, Doug, you probably know in detail, 9 or so different, from data to needs assessments to whatever. From today's perspective, I have to tell you that sounds utterly irrelevant, quite frankly, because change is so much more dramatic and fundamental. So I think the challenge today is that we cannot just think within a system. It's not a system immanent change. And the grand bargain was change, or the attempt of changing the system that existed. But if you look at the challenges that we face today, and maybe that's my number one thing, where you can't start change with a technical measure to achieve change. You need to start change by really understanding what needs to be changed, or what changes you, what changes our reality. And right now it's somewhere in between. When we are being changed, our reality is being changed every single day. I'm sitting here today, I cannot tell you whether in a week we don't have a war in the Middle East again. We've just come out of 5 weeks of every day at the receiving end of bombing, and no one is looking forward to this, but we may have to go back to this. The bad news, the good news for Lebanon about the ceasefire, is bad news for Gaza. We don't know whether the attention will turn south again, and again in 2 weeks we may be back in war. So our reality is being changed by others. If I were to look at some of the challenges that we discussed 5-10 years ago, it was growing needs and very technical things, how we deal with growing needs and who is best to place to respond to them. But today we have an environment where no one gives a rat's ass about international humanitarian law anymore, where no one gives a rat's ass about how many civilians die in a conflict. It's actually the very purpose of the war, shocking people, civilizations to give up, into killing as much as possible, destroying their history, destroying their infrastructure beyond repair, and bombing them into Stone Age. So that's where we live today. And I don't think that the grand bargain as such is the answer to this. We're being forced to be pragmatic but principled. And what that means, we are forced to work with the same actors that have withdrawn $10 billion from the aid system and are trying to establish alternative ways of doing business through the private sector and so on. But we're forced to work with them. And so that's the real challenge for me. How can we maintain some of our principles? And I was at a dinner a few weeks ago where one of the NGO representatives made a big pitch for we need to be principled, we need to ensure the humanitarian principles, we need to be independent, we need to be impartial, we will not work for these or those, and we will uphold the rights of the Palestinian people. And then I said, so if the Board of Peace gives you $30 million, I assume you're going to reject that $30 million. I said, well, that's an unfair question. That is the question.
Board of Peace, we are all familiar with the Board of Peace that was set up by Donald Trump. Yes.
So that is the question, you know. Our system is very, very vulnerable to the influence of money. The absence of money and the giving of money. And if anyone ever thought, and that's why my hand was like here, I think when you were in the field, even 10, 20 years ago, situations were difficult, they were brutal. You had to make compromises. But if you look at it from the outside, there is enormous change. But the forces right now wanting us to be transactional implementers of the interests that they attach to the money are much bigger today than they were 20 or 30 years ago. So if you look, for example, that that NGO was given $30 million to say, you take care of water sanitation in that area of Gaza. That NGO has almost no opportunity to say no or withdraw from that area, because money makes the world, even our humanitarian world, go round. And I think that, for me, is the challenge. How do we the world has changed for good. It's not going to go back to the system that we had until a few years ago. So we need to be clear on what money are we going to take and what consequences are we going to suffer for not taking the money. Under what circumstances are we going to take money? We need to, secondly, find ways of pragmatically engaging with those forces, while maintaining some of our principles, not wanting to become subcontractors, for example. And that means that I think we have to go back and stay focused on what our comparative advantage as humanitarians is. Not to stick our nose into every single human rights and God knows what issue, but to make a difference for the people we're trying to serve every single day, because that's our comparative advantage. I can tell you that every single attempt to bring the private sector into delivering what NGOs and humanitarian organizations can do much better has failed so far, and they will continue to fail. That is comparative advantage. But if we open the door with a big lecture on normative principles and so on, they're going to kick us out. If we show them we're the only ones, the United Nations and the NGO partners are the only ones, 12,000 people every single day on the ground in Gaza who deliver. The rest is planning. The rest is ideas, alternative ideas. That's our added value. That's our added advantage. We need to go where the people are, where we can make a difference. And if we make that difference, we will be taken seriously.
Nadine, do you agree, disagree? Do you want to, how do you think we can rethink the system to reform it? Is it salvageable?
Before getting back to you, I have a question.
Great, ask each other questions. I'm going to go on holiday. Great.
A couple of comments. So when we're talking about, that question you've asked this NGO representative, I want to revert back and ask not the same question. I want to ask your opinion about the money that was provided to the country-based pooled fund and the 7 or 9 contexts and the conditions that were put and the modalities in terms of funding for locals on this. And the second is also on a perception that a Palestinian colleague has communicated, saying as if we are, we're treated as suspects. He was saying that they are treated as suspects whenever there is anything related to counterterrorism, and this is putting them in a very disadvantaged point to do any advocacy for their own people and for their own rights and for their own activities. So for me, it's two questions. It's OCHA, CBPFs, the US money that was provided, I think, before the end of 2025. And the second is the comment from Palestinian colleagues.
CBPF is country-based pooled fund. Yes.
Maybe just on the first on the Palestinian colleagues' question. There is an agency in the West Bank and in Gaza and other countries around that's called the United Nations Agency for Refugee Works, UNRWA, that has, through 3 laws, been declared a terrorist organization now. And when you read the newspaper, it's always, UNRWA is always referred to as UNRWA/Hamas. UNRWA/Hamas. So if it is possible to label by a parliament, not public opinion, by a parliamentary decision, an agency of the United Nations that has worked for 70 years and provided most of the education, most of the people who are in the government of Palestine today or in the transitional administration now in Gaza have actually gone through UNRWA schools. So this same organization that has, I don't know whether there are any Palestinian colleagues in the room, they would probably confirm that UNRWA is referred to as the Ummah, as the mother of Palestinians. This agency has now been labeled a terrorist organization. If that is possible, what can you expect as an approach vis-a-vis Palestinian NGOs? But let me say, that is why it is all the more courageous and important that we support I'm moving on from the Palestinian colleague, but that we support local NGOs and local organizations. We need to be circumspect that we're not putting them into more danger that they already are in. And that's why I think we need to be focused on what we're trying to achieve, including those organizations. Are we more political? Are we more human rights? That is a dangerous undertaking. And or are you more focused on humanitarian delivery at a more technical scale, meaning water sanitation systems and dealing with children and so on and so forth? But I do think the general tendency is that those organizations must be, for me in the future, must be the main front line of the humanitarian face that I would like to see anywhere in the world. I think we have enormous capacities on the civil society front in any country. I don't know, where are you from? From Kenya. From Kenya. Well, Kenya has an enormous richness. So has Somalia. So has Niger. And I want to see that those organizations are increasingly at the forefront of delivering assistance. So we need to be clever about how we support them. And that is financially. Financially, I know that Tom Fletcher was in favor. I'm in favor of giving 100% of the money that we get from country-based pooled funds to local organizations. There are some donors who think differently. There are some technical problems involved, but that's what has to happen. Not as implementing partners of an international agency, where the international agency designs the program and then hires local organizations to deliver the goods, sometimes through 3 or 4 cascades of subcontracts and so on, but as direct recipients of aid being local organizations. So it's a difficult undertaking, but that's the direction, an important direction for me. So combining those 2 questions, that also means that we then have to be aware as international organizations what risks emanate from this around those local organizations. Are we putting them at more risk? Are they putting themselves more at risk? Are we expecting them to talk about the politics that we don't want to talk about because otherwise we get PNG'd from the countries?
Persona non grata.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why this dialogue is important here and elsewhere, that we talk to each other not as the international agency with the money and the implementing partner who has to deliver, but we talk to each other at the same level as local agencies that have the knowledge, that are in touch with vulnerable people, that know very often their priorities, that are part of the community and can tell us that's not their priority, that's not what they want, and that's not how they want it, you know. I was in the Philippines 2 years ago, and you could see the village that was after the tsunami in Tacloban was rebuilt by the United Nations, and the village that the Catholic Church with the people has built themselves. The village that they have rebuilt themselves, flowers, trees, women working as welders that have before just taken out the fish that the men were fishing and so on. For the first time, they have occupation, they have agency the way they've never had it before. Whereas the system that we have is disempowering those very same capacities. It's not easy, it's not going to happen within a night or two. But for me, that is one of the key destinations that we have to take. This system needs to be desystematized. We have to make the bureaucracy much, much leaner. And that's going back to your initial change question. If change too often reforms all these things, start with us. What is it that we think we need to change in our processes? What is it that we need to do different? But change is not about us. Change is about the people who really need to retain their agency back. And on this agency thing, very often, that's sort of a humanitarian thing, you know, towards development. We need to give people agency back. Well, don't take it away from them in the first place. You know, by delivering food, by telling them what they should receive, ask them, sit with them, what is important for them. And very often you will find food is not the most important thing for them. It's other things that matter. I'm wearing this little bracelet from a village somewhere in the outback in Choco in Colombia, you know. And where on one side of the river is a narco militia, on the other side the military, and they shoot each other all day long. And in the middle is some indigeno community. And so when we went to them, after like 6-7 hours of tracking there by boat and so on, we were sitting and said, what are your main things? What are your main priorities? You know what their main priority was? That the adolescents, the male adolescents, were asking the elders for permission to commit suicide. And if they didn't do so, their family was disgraced. Because they had fallen out of that equilibrium between nature and river and fishing and hunting and growing and so on, because of the fighting and the destruction. So their priorities sometimes look very different from what we think in our needs assessment is the priority. And so we have to come to a system where we can embrace much more again this contact with the local population, as opposed to operating a machinery that mechanically delivers, and I could show you a picture right now, the world's largest humanitarian warehouse in Copenhagen. It's 9 stories. It's like a supersized IKEA. There are 2 human beings working in there. The rest is automatized. These are kits that get packaged and that go out. That's very good, fantastic, life-saving in the immediate phase of a disaster. But it's destroying this bond between the local community and us over time, because it leads you to deliver and churn out things rather than to listen to people. For me, that is one of the most central pieces of changing back to what was, I'm not saying what system was better, but changing back towards, I think, what is one of the key pieces of change, is that local populations, or in many of the countries that we serve, have a very, very strong civil society, have means to express themselves on cell phones and so on, very differently from 10, 20 years ago.
Nadine? Still don't have an answer to the question about the country-based pooled fund and the U.S. contribution.
Yes.
Well, I can tell you on the U.S. contribution. Look, I mean, there are two ways of looking at this. The U.S. contribution comes with some requirements, and you can look at the glass half empty and or half full. Looking at the glass half full, it is $2 billion that we managed to drag back into the multilateral system that we didn't think we would manage a year ago when the US defunded basically everything. And we now have in the State Department and again, Doug, I don't want to call on you too many times, but we've discussed this many, many times, this change, who were not in favor of working through this multilateral, whether that's the UN or NGOs or whatever, again. So I do think it's an opportunity to bring these people back to the system and work with them on earmarking, on standards, on these things. However, at the moment, it also comes with some conditions that tell us what not to fund. I'm afraid if this were to be extended to Gaza, this would mean that UNRWA couldn't be funded, that we could not be working with NGOs like the ones that you mentioned before, that fear for their life or their security and are on someone's bad list. And that's the balance, and that's the challenge and the tension. I have no perfect answer to this. I'm not administering this because I'm in Gaza right now, so it's an easy way out. But I can see the dilemma, and I do think that the OCHA leadership has erred on the side of we're bringing the US back to the multilateral system. And let's not make any mistake. There is not enough money on this planet to substitute for the money that the United States is not funding anymore. There is not enough political engagement and attention on this planet for the engagement and the lack of attention that goes along with that defunding on the United States. The United States has for many, many years been critical in moving humanitarian assistance forward, but also some of the accompanying political processes. And so we must be clear. It must be a goal of ours not to say, well, we don't want to deal with them anymore. We don't like individuals on that side. We don't like what they're doing in the Middle East or whatever it is, and that's why we're not dealing with them again. For me, that is absolutely the wrong attitude. We must be bringing them back, helping them to come back to some of those principles. However, we also need to be clear about our red lines. What can we do? What can we not do? And I do think there is a gray zone, but there are also clear red lines. For me, for example, let me just be very clear, it would be a red line if we were to receive $2 billion for Gaza, and we were told you cannot fund UN Women, you cannot fund UNRWA, you cannot fund FPA, the population fund that deals with sexual and reproductive health and sexual violence and so on. That for me is a red line.
Yeah. Last question to you, Nadine, before I give the floor to our audience. Everything that Hansjoerg talked about, and we've had conversations about the changes that you think and you deeply believe are necessary. You're saying they're not cosmetic. They're surgical. Do you think, honestly, that the system and the people here in this room have the stomach for that surgery?
First layer answer, is I don't feel that this is happening. Because with everything that our colleague has been talking about, if we have this opinion within UN agency and within different stakeholders, why isn't change happening? So for me, when I look into everything, the feeling is, it doesn't look like. The second layer of the answer would be depends. Because it depends on, do we really want to acknowledge that the system needs to believe that there are other systems, one? Do we really need to understand that reform would mean genuinely transferring not only resources, but decision-making? It is all about decision-making. Who is taking the decision? Where are these spaces happening? Who are the people who are putting the items on the agenda? Who are the people who are deciding what goes to that person in a crisis? So for me, it's more about decision-making. It's more about risk sharing. It's more about transferring, even though it's a very large word to say transferring power, but it is power. Ultimately, it is power. The third layer of the answer would be a question to the people. Are you ready to relinquish power? Because this is the heart of it. The political will, the idea that, yes, we're ready to relinquish power, we're ready to take a step back, we're ready to go back and see what is happening and how things are happening, is at the heart of this reform. It's not about, giving 25% as directly as possible, and even that, it's not happening.
What percentage are we at now? 1%?
1 point something. Yeah. And I think that in 2024, it even went further down. So for me, these, funding issues are trivial, honestly. As much as we need them for the survival of local organizations, the problem is much more rooted in the trust, is much more rooted in the perception that we have of local organization. And I always say, local organization situation is similar to the situation of women who are either wanting to go into politics or to be on the boardrooms of big companies. They always have to prove that they can do more, that they can show more to be able to compete at the same level. The same is for local organizations. And I will just say one thing is that one of the colleagues said, it's just like climbing up a mountain when others are throwing stones onto you. So this is where I believe that the problem is. Are we ready to, rather than throwing stones, helping and supporting, not through lip service, but in real efficient actions?
Thank you, Nadine. As audience, you get the I will take 2 people to ask questions. You have I have 2 people already, sorry, first come, first served. Our gentleman here in the second row and the lady in the third row, you have 30 seconds to ask a question. If you please do not mask a question with a 5-minute speech, unless you don't have a question and you actually have an idea or a provocation, then don't lead with I have a question, just say what you want to say. And for that, you get a minute. Let's start with the gentleman.
Thank you so much for nice and beautiful presentation and highlights. I just need to know, do you find, you already mentioned that there is difficulties in utilization of fund to make difference for any project. Is it something that is related with accountability and transparency?
Is it all about accountability and transparency, the difficulty in really relinquishing funding or transferring funding? Yes? Yeah. Thank you. And the lady on the third row?
Good morning, thank you. I'm Anastasia. I'm working with OCHA Syria in Damascus, so it was really great hearing this discussion so quickly. 2 weeks ago, there was a joint visit by Tom Fletcher and the UNDP administrator, Alexander De Croo, to Syria. I was supporting in that visit. And also, the HNRP was launched in Syria with 15.6 million people still in need in Syria. So the message of the joint visit was basically that Syria is now safe, it's moving from emergency state to early recovery, and it was really clear that OCHA's role is decreasing in Syria and the UNDP role, development, early recovery, is increasing since the war has ended. So basically my question, can we really consider Syria is still safe? Especially it was listed that it's safe and the danger pay was removed. Second question, do we really need to decrease the humanitarian response versus early recovery with still 15.6 million people in need in Syria according to the latest data and HNRP? Thank you.
Thank you. So who wants to go first? On the first question of, is it about accountability or transparency? I think there's an assumption there that there's less accountability or transparency when it's the local groups, but I think research has shown that's not actually true. Or did I read my research wrong? Nadine, tell me.
I believe that, you know, when we're talking about accountability and transparency, some of it might be true, but we're using it just as a barrier to avoid going further onto that path. I don't think that, I mean, I come from a local organization, and whenever we created this local organization, we never thought that, you know, I'm going to be here speaking in 20 years. For me, it was mainly, literally, just making sure that me and my friends are able to do something with young and women in my community. It was never, ever in my mind that we would be here. So for me, whenever anybody asks me to review, look into my governance, we're ready. But at the same time, one of the things that I always avoid is I don't want us to be another international organization that gets challenged by going quickly and responding quickly because of all these bureaucratic requests. So no, I don't think it's accountability and transparency, because in a lot of times, even if you have this formal accountability towards your donors, what is even more critical for local organizations is the reputational risk they have within their own community. This is where the bigger accountability for me, at least, lies. When I feel that these people know me, they know my parents, they know my dad, they know my family, they know my relatives, and these are for me that would hurt me even more than what an ex-donor would talk about me or about my organization. So sometimes using the accountability and transparency as an alibi, I believe, is too far-fetched. Mm-hmm. It might be true. I'm not saying all local organizations are angels. We're not. We need to do some work. We need to do a lot of things. This is not the issue. The issue is that don't use this as an alibi to stop local organizations of being able to access funds. And if you have requirements, ask them. Go for it.
Thank you. Hansjoerg, 1 minute on the question of your OCHA colleague. Questions?
Can I just second?
If it's 10 seconds, yes.
No, I very much agree. At a very technical level, of course, there are accountability issues, and they're raised by donors, and they're raised by agencies who use local NGOs as implementing partners. But the much larger question is the accountability to local populations, to the people we're trying to serve. And if you go out, in my view, the entire needs assessment system is skewed towards the international sector. If you have 15 organizations that go out, you will have 15 plus times 3 priorities. Everything is a priority. But when you speak to the population, they tell you what their 2 or 3 priorities are. That's the social contract that we need to get to, that we respond first to the 2 or 3 priorities that local populations really have. And in that respect, for me, local NGOs are not the better international organization. They are a moderator. I don't want to hear it from a local organization, a local NGO. I want to hear it from the people. And so, but local organizations are better placed. And so the accountability that you mentioned between the local population and the local NGO is always going to be stronger than that between an international organization and the local. That's on the OCHA issue. That is, I mean, for everyone who is for those 5 to 20 years, you know, they've all been working on Nexus many times. It's the most difficult issue. It's political and so on. Just the 3 things that I want to say. We have situations where we have humanitarian response plans for 15 or 20 years. And we have those plans, and we have those needs assessments, and we continue to say that people are in need, 15 million or whatever, because we're not doing enough about addressing the reasons for why these people every year still have the same need. And so if you go to Syria, if you go to even now Gaza, their basic service needs. So water trucking burns around 1/3 or 50 to 50% of all the funding that UNICEF gets, because we have to truck water to people who pour it into jerry cans from the truck. That is the most inefficient and costly way of doing aid. What we have to do is we have to put some pipes and some restoration of water systems into this. Not build a whole new system, that is development. But we need to be able to do more than truck water and hand out water. Now, that's where, for some people, the politics kick in. They don't want to have a functioning water system back there. But that's also where we, the humanitarians, and these cluster systems that are silos, prevent actually this onward development. So my answer to your proposition is, it's not wrong that Tom Fletcher and Alexander De Croo went together, but what is wrong if the conclusion is humanitarian doesn't matter anymore and it's all now a development story. What needs to be, we need to overcome this silliness of it's either humanitarian or recovery. That's not how life works. You know, and it's the same in Syria. I'm personally very worried. I was just talking to someone yesterday about the situation in Syria for no reason of their own. But it's if you look at all the different pieces, including Iraq and so on, if the war were to resume, and the Middle East war, the whole place is going to be in flames. So that would be what means that we need to be prudent and ready to be able to deliver humanitarian assistance again. But it would not be right to say we're going to deliver humanitarian assistance for 20 years until peace breaks out in the Middle East. Yeah. We need to use opportunities of lulls in the ceasefires to repair what can be repaired, to help people move on. I'll end on that. If someone asked me a few months ago, when you go to Gaza, I mean, how can you bear this and how can you put up with this and what inspires you? I can tell you what inspires me to go back there tomorrow morning is the people of Gaza. It's the people of Syria. Those people who do not just sit there and wait for WFP or World Soup Kitchen to hand out soup to them. They clean every day. They teach their children every single day. They rebuild, they clean up, they fix what can be fixed. That is our responsibility, to support them in fixing things. And if the bombs fly again in 2 months or 3 months, too bad. It's being destroyed, and the day after the bombs stop, we'll start rebuilding again. That is our life. It's frustrating. It's the stones that are being thrown at us, but that's the profession we're choosing. That's our task.
I'd like to invite everyone to please stand. We heard these inspiring, provoking, challenging analysis and challenges put on us. How many of you in this room that with all of that and the messiness of it, that fundamental change is possible in the next 10 years in the humanitarian system? Raise your hand. This is the challenge, not only for the rest of the 2 days, but as we move out of here tomorrow. Take that and remember that picture in your mind. And with that, I'd like to thank Nadine and Hansjoerg for your passion, your authenticity, and your time. Thank you, everyone.